We're almost there. I can feel it. Indeed, and a long journey it's been. Onward. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Shovel Knight Specter of Torment. In the last part we went through our first few proper members of the Order of No Quarter, and now it's time for this stage. Right here we got some caltrops, press Y and you can scatter some spikes in front of unsuspecting foes. It's effectively a trap type sub-weapon. So in lieu of the dream sequences from the original Shovel Knight that you got between certain stages, every couple of boss fights we instead get these little flashback stages told in sepia tone. This is entirely for backstory, but we do have our buddy here who acts as effectively a moving lamp at all times to send you upwards towards certain places. Notably, during these, your dash jump has a little more of like an arc for where you're going, because you'll actively be thrown upwards and then you'll be spinning up in the air. If you don't hold a button, you're gonna drop like a rock, but if you're holding a button left or right, you will travel a little bit further. It's not too bad. In fact, these levels are very short, so it's not that big a deal to begin with. But notably, any money you get in these do carry over to the main gameplay stuff. And if you die, I do believe you still lose some, so be careful with that. Something to keep in mind, though, during these levels, you are locked to just the caltrop as your sub-weapon. You don't have access to the dread talent or anything else. Thankfully, as you can see, the enemies they throw at you to begin with aren't anything that strong to begin with, but also the caltrop will usually take them out in one shot anyway, and the ones it doesn't, you can just combo by throwing multiple down. I like these a lot though because they get good money out of you for bonus stages still, just like the actual like dream sequences, but they actively forward the story in some way. With that said, if you do die in these, you do still lose money, but thankfully since they're so short, most of the money's easy to get back. Let's say we stop here for the night. Donovan. As a father, I'm worried about him. Do you think the amulet will truly protect him from all harm? Your boy has much to learn about the world, certainly, but if this trinket is as powerful as they say, I can only hope the legends hold true. Don't worry, we won't be leaving empty-handed. Come now, let's rest, and tomorrow we'll find out for ourselves. With that said, now properly welcome back to Specter of Torment. We got some more curios to get, as well as all the money we have from that previous level, so let's get into it with our next sub-weapon, the Skeletal Sentry. This is one I got a lot more use out of on a first playthrough, but if you're good about using this a lot, it can be really good. Summon a Skeleton Sniper with Y. You throw a skull backwards and then will shoot several shots in a row that can do some good damage, and when you press the Y button again, it self-destructs in a plus shape, which will also damage enemies or destroy blocks. In some instances, this is a very good way to keep yourself safe while platforming around, but I do not use it too much nowadays, only because I think other sub-weapons do the same job pretty well. If you're a more defensive player, though, this can be a lifesaver in certain combat scenarios. It's also really good in boss fights for keeping damage coming from a single direction while you're platforming around, probably trying to do dash slashes against them and all that. Now, you can go get another armor if you want to with the amount of money I currently have, but I'm going to focus on upgrading my curios because those are better for me in the long term since I already have the one armor I really, really like. With that said, we also got a new friend up here. Han the Phantom Striker! Yeah, no, I'm not really Phantom Striker. Did I fool you? If you're here, then who guards my hideout? I love the animation of it drinking the wine, too. But we also got a new friend down here. Let's go talk to her and see what she has to say. Hello, I saw you dashing through the lich yard. You must be Specter Knight. I'm so happy to finally meet ya. Keeping morale high around here is important, so to welcome you, let me share my greatest treasure. Dance! Well, get your blood pumping, huh? It makes me ill. This is no place for your foolish mirth. Begone! But what? I just wanted to... Must you be escorted? How could you? You know, I studied that dance just for you. You monster! I'll have my revenge! Cold Shoulder, you steeled your resolve and remained cool in the face of jubilance. Summon this ability at any time by holding down. This actively counts for 100%. It allows you to assume an arms crossed pose, which in the moment you're waiting on like a moving platform can be kind of fun to deal with. If you're missing a little bit when trying to go for 100%, it's probably that. Will Skull upgrade lets it regenerate more willpower at once. The Shadow Mirror upgrade lets it extend further with the reflection and collect items such as gold that's on the ground outright, health, or I think even gold you yourself were dropped. Oh, hey, Specter Knight, you know, no one ever told me how boring it would be to guard the ocean. It's so dull and empty, just staring into an endless void for hours on end. I wish I could guard somewhere exciting. Well, let's see where we can send you to this time around, my little buddy. Now, something I really do appreciate as well about the Tower of Fate, it actually does change a little bit as you go through the game. Namely, the little bar area to our west will actually get more enemies added to it using the actual bar as you go through. Now you're green. Ah, intense! My adrenaline's pumping. I feel great, like I could leap high into the air. I'm green. I've got it. I'm going to burst onto the scene over the Explodatorium. Well, it seems like he's doing pretty good for himself. That jump cut there was me checking if I could actually afford any of the armor, but the throwing sickle upgrade's also really good because now it travels farther, I think we'll go through obstacles, but also collect gold along the way. Let's head on to our next stage. We've cleared all of Tier 1 from the original game, so it's time for the Explodatorium with Plague Knight. The Explodatorium has some pretty new tricks along the way, but before we get into that, let's talk about Plague Knight's bio from the original campaign. Sometimes the bomb is mightier than the sword. Deep in the recesses of his alchemical lab, Plague Knight perfects concoctions both poisonous and explosive. Toxin, disease, and death are his playgrounds. Even his comrades give Plague Knight a wide berth because he spreads more than just the common cold. With an array of mysterious and magical bottles at his side, Plague Knight can be considered the black sheep of the Order of No Quarter. As for pros, he has his maniacal scientific mind, and his fearlessness, that's bordering on recklessness. Cons, he's physically weak, he's pretty short in stature, and he's shy at parties. So something this stage does pretty differently in this campaign compared to the other ones is that there's actually a lot more of a water current flowing through here. There's going to be water flowing usually from the top of the screen down, and it'll push you left and right depending on which way it's going across the platforms. Which isn't too bad on its own, but combine that with bottomless pits, exploding vials that will travel along the water's flow specifically, and enemies jumping from all over the place, and you could have a rough time in this level. I don't think this is the hardest rendition of Plague Knight's stage. Honestly, I do think the hardest one of his stages overall is probably the original version of his stage as Shovel Knight, if only because Shovel Knight's movement is a little more limited despite his tools being better for it overall, if that makes sense. Mind, it's kind of weird to think about that because the way King Knight's campaign handles a lot of things is radically different, so thinking about Plague Knight's stage in that, so to speak, is not exactly registering in the same way as the other three versions of this stage. Now, if there's something I could say about this stage, its red skulls aren't too bad to find, but I do think it has probably one of the best hidden wisps in the entire campaign, in that the way to find it is probably the least obvious hittable block in the game, which Shovel Knight in general, across its 4 campaigns, does a pretty good job of marking what is destructible. And technically you can tell that's destructible up there as well. It's just that I always forget it's there because my brain just registers that as part of the ceiling. It's not often you actively destroy a ceiling in this campaign, or any campaign really. You're usually destroying a floor or a wall. And I think that's why I constantly miss this Darkness Wisp. Notably, there is actually an achievement for getting every single wisp within the stages themselves instead of having to buy any of them. But I think in the case you miss one in the stage, you can go back and get it still. It's just, you'll have to go through the stage again in the case you want it. Which, in the case you're missing red skulls, you're probably going to do anyway, but in the case you're not, it might not exactly be worth it to some people I know, because I brought this up in the other campaign. Shovel Knight's very interesting to me because its stages are much longer than the average Mega Man stages in comparison, or even Castlevania for that matter, but they don't feel like they're as long as they actively are despite the amount of checkpoints, because they do so well at throwing new combinations of their mechanics and challenges at you, so you're always at least invested. Even though their stages can be long, there's seldom a, like, dry moment across most of the stages. There's a couple I can think of, at least in the Shovel Knight and Plague Knight campaign, and King Knight has a couple of those notes especially to me, but, like, especially Specter Knight, you don't really feel the length as much as you'd think you would. With that said, with these barrels work the same way they did in the main campaign. There's 2 patterns of them going up and down. Getting pushed into spikes is instant kill, of course, but the ones with spikes on them are not instant kill. I believe that is just damage, but it's been a while since I got hit, so I actually might be forgetting. I think it's just damage, though. Now, if there is something I find kind of interesting about this particular campaign that I don't think I've talked about yet, I've already mentioned, obviously, and we've seen that the world map doesn't exist, and thus a lot of the optional bosses and even the optional stages from the original games don't exist. But this is a lot shorter of a campaign than, I think, all 3 of the others. For instance, my LP of Shovel of Hope and Plague of Shadows are both 11 parts each. This is only 8. I have no idea how long King of Cards is going to be when I eventually get to that. There's a chance that could actually be the longest LP of the set. Because technically, while the stages themselves are shorter, that has the most stages out of all of the campaigns due to its radically different platforming mentality and setup. But we'll see when I get to that, whenever I get to that. And honestly, I'm still not sure how I'm going to handle after King of Cards for this, because there's a surprising amount to the treasure trove, still even outside of the main 4 campaigns, because obviously there's the challenge and all that, but there's also the showdown mode, which I think has its own story. I've barely messed with it. If I mess with that in its own LP, I guess we'll see. With that said, time for the usual mini-boss against this particular scientist, but now you have to contend with water currents. Phase 1 is the same, it throws potions all over the place until it finds the potion it wants, in which case it becomes a gigantic yeti that charges left and right across the screen. The Dread Talon combined with the, Dash Slash means you can do a lot of damage to this particular mini-boss very quickly and kill it much faster than any other campaigns. But be careful all the same, because the amount of damage you can take there with your lower health can pile up pretty quick. We are coming up on what I think is the worst jump in this stage, though. This jump was in both of the other campaigns, but due to Specter Knight's own mechanics, it feels a lot tighter than basically any other jump in the stage, let alone most of the campaign, honestly. Because we hear when this part of the stage, we obviously have the torches that go off in a rhythm. There's gonna be one, then there's like a 3 or 4 or 5 tile wide gap, and then a wall up to the second one that also has a torch that goes off. And then we got this enemy that homes in on you. I have basically never made this whole entire section without getting hit, because my timing with getting past that particular torch right here has just always sucked, and I can't tell if it's because I'm jumping earlier / later than I should be, or if it's just absurdly tight to get through that normally. I've never liked that particular jump. I think I died there like 3 or 4 times my first playthrough too. Which, just to mention it, Specter of Torment still has the same effect as on players that the other 2 playthroughs thus far we've done have done, where dying late in a stage between 2 checkpoints can feel kind of rough, because you'll probably get flustered and start messing up on the stuff you cleared first try that time. With that said, you also start getting really good at memorizing what level design is between 2 checkpoints as you go. And that level of mastery does feel pretty good, but it makes the deaths that make you lose a lot of progress feel all the more punishing and demoralizing, especially if you lose more and more gold. With that said, I do think on my first playthrough, Specter of Torment, despite it being a quote-unquote hard mode, had my fewest amount of deaths out of all the extended campaigns. I think the campaign I died the most in was actually King Knight's overall. I think Shovel of Hope was about the middle, and I think Plague of Shadows was just barely above that, because it took me a while to get used to that particular movement set. So right here we have the cat mimic from the Tower of Fate itself. You can slash them to get a lot of money. There's only a couple of them in the game period, but they're really good for getting some cash, if you're in need of it for some reason. Here on the last main screen of this stage is probably where things get the most chaotic, as you have several different vials sending fires several different ways across the level design. Like I said, the vials only follow a water current, but in the case they reach a split like you'd see a couple times below us, they follow the direction that the curve happens at the bottom of the little waterfalls. I have died to this particular guard once or twice. That's kind of a rough place to die right before the final checkpoint, but here we are. It's time for Plague Knight himself, so get ready, use whatever sub-weapon you're ready for here, and we're good to go. Also, because I haven't mentioned it, you can swap between sub-weapons with the L and R buttons, and if you press both at once, you cancel out any ones you have selected.
What? Wow, somebody called the Embalmer. This one's past its prime. What are you even doing here?
Show yourself. I've come to offer you the position of Court Alchemist to the Enchantress. Join us in her army of invincible knights.
Oh, you don't say. Sounds important. Invisible knights, tell me more. Boom!
You are clearly not paying attention. Perhaps my scythe will get through to you. Plague Knight, once again reverting to his boss fight sprite rather than his playable sprite from Plague of Shadows, is about the chaotic fight he was in the main campaign. Throughout this fight, Plague Knight is throwing vials up, down, and all over the place, which will destroy platforms, meaning that the landscape starts to get a lot more uneven. He can spawn in test tubes that act as platforms, but they can also explode themselves if hit with a vial, which causes a large explosion. And later on in the fight, towards the latter half of his health bar, he'll send in clones that are also throwing stuff all over the place. If you let this fight get going, it gets loud fast, but thankfully, once again, Specter Knight's moveset is more than enough to take care of him pretty quickly. Also, as edgy as it is, I love the victory pose for Specter Knight. Honestly, Specter Knight probably has my favorite sprite sheet out of all the playable knights. It's hitting me hard in the early 2010s edge phase I had, but damn it, Grim Reaper stuff is still so cool to me. Alright, let's make our usual lap around. Red's new curio he got is the Bounding Soul, which is probably the curio I've used the least throughout all my playthroughs of Specter of Torment. If you've ever played Castlevania, it's a pretty direct parallel to the gem subweapon present in some of the games from the middle of the franchise. You throw a projectile that'll bounce off of walls in whatever way they bounce off walls, usually in 45-degree angles. It's powerful, it can take out enemies pretty quickly, don't get me wrong. I just don't find much use for it when I have other ways to attack from distances that I think are better for my playstyle. Something that this particular tutorial doesn't do a good job of showing, though, is that you can have multiple on-screen of them at a time, I think like up to like 4 or so of them, and they last for a couple seconds before they disappear. It's not a number of bounces that makes them vanish. Next up, let's go talk to good old Plaguey up at the dinner table. See what he has to say about all this. And hey, we even got a minion here from him. The Explodatorium is definitely our only headquarters. Yep, you can always find Plague Knight there. He doesn't ever leave and go anywhere, I really promise. I don't believe you.
This tower sure is seeing a boost of activity lately. Business is booming. I'm having a blast.
Oh, Plague Knight, I love you. Honestly, out of the characterization that all the extended knights get, Plague Knight probably is my favorite.
Hey, a bit of business. It was slim pickings before, but now I have some prey to circle.
Next up, let's go get our curio upgrades and help our gold armor buddy out. The Bounding Souls upgrade lets it cut through enemies outright, so it can last more than a single enemy, and it collects, what's it called? It collects gold along the way. Whereas I think the Skeletal Sentry fires more projectiles and lasts longer. No more science. Explosions ring constantly in my ear. I see bright flashes when I close my eyes. I don't know how his minions can stand it. It's driving me crazy. Oh, you especially need some help right now. It's around now that helping our gold armor buddy get upgraded, quote unquote, can get a little harder because he moves a lot farther and faster, so you need to time yourself a little more precisely. Again, though, if you just do 2 hits and then wait for him to be directly below it or on the way to it for the third, you'll be fine. Behold my metallic sheen! Maybe I should combine everything I've learned and serve the Clockwork Tower. I've always found machines to be fascinating, and Tinker Knight seems to be a level-headed leader. Yeah! Good for you, you're finding your place in the world. We all need to do a little bit of that, I think. With that said, let's get ready to head on over to our next level. I usually head after Treasure Knight after Plague Knight in this particular expansion, because I feel like that's a good difficulty curve comparison. Let's go! Hi.
Stop right there! Rise is here to save the day!
Rise.
The one and only. Uncle said there's evil stuff going on in here, and when there's evil afoot, Rise is on the rise.
Childish. You don't belong in this place. Run along before you get hurt. Who dares to intrude on my tower?
Hey lady, my name's Rise. Are you here to help me beat these guys up?
Oh, looking for an apprentice of your own, Specter Knight. He's nobody, just a naive kid. Let him be. I'll escort him out myself. A nobody, you say? Well, that just won't do. Let's make something of him, shall we?
What are you doing to me? The darkness, it hurts! Stop! Ah!
So potent. Now this is the kind of feeling I could get used to. Put 'em up, Skinny. Why don't we take my new powers for a spin? Alright, we've seen a bit of a pattern change for this particular character because of his new dark attire. He's all about doing jump slashes himself, homing in on you, but throwing his little boomerang at the floor every now and then where it takes a bit of a note out of Sigma from X4 when it'll fire projectiles along both sides from it. He can also throw it in such a way where it'll rotate and follow the floor in the direction you're facing towards the wall as well. Again, kind of directly out of Sigma from X4. This is kind of a rough fight to do without Curios, to the point where I remember there being some criticism about that at some point over the years. But ultimately, as long as you're using Curios and you have a good amount of health from the wisps and stages, you should be fine. Also, I called him Dark Rise there. I think it's actually meant to be pronounced Reese, but I've never been too certain because Reese is on the rise, just doesn't have the same ring as Rise is on the rise. I don't know. Worth noting that Reese is technically a Kickstarter backer reward. He was from the Director for a Day campaign. Danny D. Henderson Jr. or Seizui is the person who designed him, whereas the Phantom Striker was also one of those. Forgot to mention that last time. They were designed by Stephen Ness. Charge slashes go burr.
Oh, how delightful. I'm impressed, Reese. Perhaps I can find a use for you around here. Let's see, that nervous acolyte is certainly unfit to guard this mirror. Take his place, if you would. Of course, my master. Can I destroy him? Oh, not too hasty, my child. He can ponder his fate in the dungeon. And you, stop wasting time. Return to the task at hand, and do not fail me again.
Well, we got a new stage select person. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, now that we got Reese as our person at the teleporter, we're gonna head after Treasure Night. See you guys then.